We stand on the precipice of a biological and constitutional crisis so vast in scale that its consequences, should we fail to act, will echo through generations to come. What is at stake is not merely public health policy, nor the isolated consideration of environmental toxicology, but the very continuity of transgenerational traits, the intergenerational fidelity of biological encoding that defines the essence of human development. This is not speculative, it is not theoretical. It is scientific inevitability, the culmination of decades of empirical research from the molecular to the epigenetic, from neurodevelopment to immunological stability, all pointing to a single, inescapable reality. Bioelectric dissonance from entropic waste, whether injected, absorbed, or ingested, disrupts the foundational processes of life. And of all the sources of entropic waste, the most pervasive, the most invisible, and the most insidiously ignored is electromagnetic radiation, RF exposure, from wireless technology. This is the great unspoken truth behind the autism crisis, the infertility epidemic, and the catastrophic rise in neurodegenerative diseases. It is a truth that has been systematically erased from public discourse, not because it lacks empirical validation, but because the legislative architecture of our nation has been deliberately weaponized against its recognition. Until we dismantle Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act, which forbids local governments from opposing RF infrastructure on health grounds, until we enforce Public Law 90-602, which mandates continuous safety research into radiation-emitting technologies but has been systematically defunded, until we reclaim the right to even acknowledge the true mechanisms behind this crisis, we will continue to be trapped in a manufactured illusion of causality, misdirected by half-truths while the fundamental force behind biological entropy escalates unabated. The continuity of transgenerational traits, the bioelectric basis of life itself. Nature does not operate in chaos. The biological blueprint of life is encoded within an electromagnetic lattice, a structured bioelectric matrix that governs not only individual development but the fidelity of genetic inheritance across generations. This is the underlying principle of transgenerational continuity, the passing of stable, coherent biological traits from one generation to the next. Bioelectric coherence in development. The nervous system, the endocrine system, the immune system, every fundamental biological process is regulated through precisely orchestrated electromagnetic interactions. This is not fringe science. We have known for decades that bioelectric fields determine pattern formation in embryogenesis, that neural oscillations synchronize cognitive function, and that cellular repair mechanisms depend on precise electrochemical gradients. The disruption of biological fidelity by entropic waste. Entropic waste, whether in the form of chemical disruptors like toxins, heavy metals, or pharmaceuticals, or electromagnetic pollution such as RF exposure and non-ionizing radiation, interferes with the body's ability to sustain its bioelectric coherence. The failure to maintain bioelectric integrity is what underlies autism spectrum disorders, cognitive impairments, infertility, neurodegeneration, and even immunological collapse. This explains why environmental disruptions, including but not limited to vaccines, can trigger severe, persistent developmental disorders, not because vaccines are inherently the singular cause, but because the neurological system, once destabilized by chronic RF exposure, lacks the capacity to recalibrate. The scientific trail of evidence mechanisms, animal models, and suppressed data. Those who dismiss the RF autism connection as speculative are not merely uninformed, they are engaging in deliberate scientific denial. The empirical record is overwhelming, and it spans multiple disciplines. The Yale Mouse Study. Research conducted at Yale School of Medicine found that in utero, exposure to cell phone radiation permanently altered the neurological function of offspring, inducing ADHD-like behaviors, cognitive deficits, and abnormal neurodevelopmental wiring. The conclusion was unambiguous. Electromagnetic exposure during critical developmental windows fundamentally alters neural pathways. Martin Pall's work on voltage-gated calcium channels is groundbreaking. RF radiation hyperactivates these channels, triggering a cascade of oxidative stress, neuronal excitotoxicity, and DNA damage. This mechanism explains not only why RF exposure accelerates neurodevelopmental disorders, but also why it amplifies the neurotoxic effects of other environmental stressors, including vaccines, air pollutants, and industrial chemicals. The National Toxicology Program's cancer findings were incredibly significant. The NTP study provided clear evidence of carcinogenicity from RF exposure. Yet rather than triggering regulatory reform, it resulted in the immediate defunding of further research. This is not just negligence. It is a direct violation of Public Law 9602, which mandates ongoing safety evaluations of radiation-emitting technologies. If RF radiation can cause cancer, what does that tell us about its ability to disrupt neurodevelopment, reproduction, and immune homeostasis? The Bioinitiative Report is a comprehensive document, compiling over 1,800 studies confirming non-thermal RF bioeffects. These include DNA strand breaks, mitochondrial dysfunction, increased blood-brain barrier permeability, and cognitive impairment in children. The list is exhaustive, and yet it remains unacknowledged in official safety guidelines. The pathological consequence, the autism fertility collapse, and the legislative gag order that ensures it. We are witnessing a convergence of biological crises, autism prevalence, plummeting fertility rates, neurodegenerative diseases, and immune dysregulation, all accelerating in tandem with the global expansion of RF-based infrastructure. And yet, we cannot even challenge this under current law. Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act, a legal firewall against public health. This provision ensures that no matter what the scientific evidence says, RF exposure levels cannot be legally challenged on health grounds. It is the only environmental toxin in existence where communities are prohibited from invoking health risks in infrastructure debates. Public Law 90-602, the neglected safeguard. Congress passed this law precisely to ensure continuous research and regulatory adaptation to new radiation technologies. By systematically defunding it, the federal government has committed scientific fraud on an industrial scale. The Autism Advocacy Paradox, a movement that ignores its own root cause. Celebrities, philanthropists, and autism awareness organizations continue chasing genetic and chemical culprits while ignoring the primary environmental disruptor. If you are not demanding the repeal of Section 704 and the full enforcement of Public Law 90-602, you are not advocating for autism research. You are perpetuating its continued rise. The only acceptable path forward # Trump repeal 704 and full enforcement of Public Law 90-602. If we do not act now, we will enter a bioelectric point of no return, wherein the transgenerational disruption of human development becomes permanent. Repeal Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act. Restore constitutional rights to oppose wireless infrastructure on health grounds. Allow local governments to protect their communities. Fully enforce Public Law 90-602, fund independent RF safety research, establish transparent reporting of non-thermal bioeffects, shift infrastructure to biologically safe technologies, mandate Li-Fi and fiber optic alternatives to reduce RF saturation, prioritize space-based broadband over terrestrial wireless expansion. Final words, a call to the thought leaders of our time. The time for scientific cowardice is over. We cannot mitigate this crisis while RF exposure remains legally untouchable. We cannot pretend to advocate for children while ignoring the root cause of their suffering. We cannot claim to value truth while accepting legislative gag orders that suppress it. The continuity of transgenerational traits is being erased before our eyes. And the choice is now ours: stand and fight or bear witness to biological collapse. The answer is clear. #Trump Repeal 704. Enforce Public Law 90-602. Reclaim the bioelectric integrity of humanity. Visit RF Safe to learn more.